Mary Lawler is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, and she signed the letter and joins it from Tbilisi in Georgia. It's good to see you, ma'am. Thank you for taking the time. Look, the Israeli government, the Prime Minister, seems to be singularly deaf to this call for a ceasefire. And even humanitarian pause, which the US is putting forward, is not getting very far. Would you accept a pause?
Well, I suppose I need to say I come at it from a human rights perspective and a rule of law perspective and a justice perspective. So we have seen the atrocities by Hamas, and we know that there's a lot of fear in Israel. We know that the general population are very fearful. And they're also very fearful of the internal violence. And I condemn unequivocally the actions which created such terror in Israel, and the killings of all those innocent men, women and children. On the other hand, what is happening now in Israel is that anyone who's speaking out, even to say, and I get all this from human rights defenders. I have contacts with human rights defenders in Israel and in West Bank and Gaza. So anyone who's speaking out, even to say if there are innocent civilians in Gaza who shouldn't be suffering needlessly, has to weigh the risk of whether there will be verbal, if not physical attacks. Right. And we have seen physical attacks. And then when, they created terror, Hamas created terror for the civilian population in Israel. But that doesn't allow the Israeli government under international law to do the same thing.
Right.
And what's happening...
We can pretty much sum up the argument in that, and I'm not being unduly simplistic, but we can pretty much sum up the argument as being two wrongs don't make a right. And Hamas's atrocity does not entitle Israel to basically do the same sort of stuff, but in a different way. I mean, that is the gist of the legal argument that is being put forward. The humanitarian point is, in a sense, more tricky, because Israel's going to have to consent, even if the aid comes via the Rafah and through Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you look at it, it really is a wound to the soul, is the way I think of it, because when you see the little bodies wrapped in white of the baby children and the terror on the children's faces, and you think about what they are being subjected to, that the consistent bombing and not knowing whether they're being safe, and the no food, no fuel, no water, no food. And I understand from a human rights defender in Gaza, Raji Sourani, whose house was bombed. He luckily escaped, but he moved and then he was bombed again. There is the bakeries have run out of bread, and the population needs bread. And he tried to go south, and the Israelis were bombing from the sea. So I suppose what I'm saying is that, nothing will happen until there is, whether it's a pause for a start to let in the huge needed humanitarian supplies, or whether it can develop into a ceasefire so that this horrible madness can stop, and some sort of political resolution, if not resolution, but advancement at least, to stop the killing.
But Israel doesn't want a political solution. Israel wants the evisceration of Hamas. And I can't see any obvious or simple way that you square that circle with a ceasefire whilst they're prosecuting their goal.
Of course, and we have seen that in wars around the world. We saw it in my own country, in Ireland and Northern Ireland. It took a very long time. But at the end of the day, the only thing that Israel and Hamas have been at odds for many years. Gaza has been an open prison for many years. There have been several bombings, and nothing has worked. And so clearly violence isn't the answer there. So there has to be some political renewal of what should happen next. And that means that there has to be a ceasefire. There has to be monitoring of that ceasefire by an international group. The hostages have to be released, and the humanitarian aid has to. That's the first priority. The humanitarian aid has to get in.
Do you worry that the complexity now war's never simple, but the addition of the hostages creates a completely unique scenario to that which arguably negotiated war was used to in that sense, and therefore will make it much more difficult, because the slightest harm to hostages, and let's face it, if we look at the number from different countries, this is, and I was only reading today the number of people from Thailand who were confirmed dead in the Israeli in Hamas's attack on Israel. This was an attack on the rest of the world as well.
Yes, and the thing is, you can see how other countries are being drawn into this, because it has been deep and decades-long conflict. But clearly what happened on the 7th of October pushed it beyond the limits of what had previously been, I suppose, acceptable in one way or another. And I do worry. Of course I worry. But what I really worry about most is that the innocent civilian population, it's a massacre of the innocents who are caught between Hamas and the Israelis.
Right. I'm grateful for your time tonight, ma'am. Thank you. We will talk more again. It's important. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.